President.
The senior senator from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you. I ask consent to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I've come to the floor today to introduce on behalf of 34 senators the Job Protection Act. The Job Protection Act is occasioned by a decision of the Acting General Counsel of the National Labor Relations Board to file a complaint to stop the Boeing company from building airplanes at a non-union plant in South Carolina, suggesting that a unionized American company cannot expand its operations into one of 22 states with a right-to-work law. A right-to-work law protects a worker's right to join or not to join a union. For example, in Tennessee, in the case, we're a right-to-work state, in the case of a Saturn employee, where the United Auto Workers is the bargaining agent, a worker at the Saturn plant doesn't have to join the union or even to pay dues, but he does have to accept, or she, the UAW as its bargaining agent. Or at the Nissan plant, which is a few miles away from the General Motors plant, the workers there have 3 times elected not to have a union as a bargaining agent. So that's what a right-to-work state is. There are 22 of them. And the state of New Hampshire is in the process of deciding whether to become the 23rd. The legislature's of one view, the governor's of a different view, and we'll soon know what the result is. The Job Protection Act that I introduced today on behalf of 34 United States senators would preserve the federal law's current protection of state right-to-work laws in the National Labor Relations Act and provide necessary clarity to prevent the NLRB from moving forward in their case against Boeing or attempting a similar strategy against other companies. Specifically, the Job Protection Act would first explicitly clarify that the board can't order an employer to relocate jobs from one location to another. 2, it guarantees an employer the right to decide where to do business within the United States. And 3, protects an employer's free speech regarding the costs associated with having a unionized workforce without fear of such communication being used as evidence in an anti-union discrimination suit. I ask unanimous consent to include in the record at this point the legislation, the Job Protection Act, the names of the 34 United States senators who are original co-sponsors of the Job Protection Act. And at the end of my remarks, Mr. President, I ask that we include 2 articles from the Wall Street Journal. The first, written by me on April 29, and the second, written by the president of the Boeing company, Jim McNerney, who's also chairman of President Obama's Export Council.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Now, to make a few remarks about the actions that have caused this. I've just left a hearing in the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee on the middle class in America. And one of the witnesses there was the general counsel of the Boeing company. And as might be expected, given the notoriety of this case and the breathtaking scope of it, he got a lot of the questions. Let me first say why there's such a breathtaking scope here. Up until the filing of the complaint, one would assume that a manufacturing company, such as Boeing, or a smaller company, who wanted to open a new plant to create new jobs could make its own decision about where to do that. And that in doing so, it could take into account such factors as the cost of labor. It could take into account such factors as the labor relations within a state, as well as the geographical location of the state, and many other factors. But the reason the decision by the Acting General Counsel has attracted so much attention is it basically says, or at least it suggests, to any company manufacturing a product in a state which is not a right-to-work state, such as Washington, that you'd better think twice before you open a new production line in one of the right-to-work states. Now, let me talk for a moment about why that has an impact upon the middle class in America. 30 years ago, I was governor of Tennessee. We were the third poorest state. My goal was to raise family incomes, or to create an environment in which they could be raised. I knew enough to know, I was a young governor, but I knew enough to know that the government didn't raise the incomes, but it might create a good environment for that. I went to my first White House dinner with the President of the United States. The President was then Jimmy Carter. The President said to us governors, very nice dinner, just the governors and their spouses, the President and Mrs. Carter, governors, go to Japan. Persuade them to make in the United States what they sell in the United States. I remember I called Dean Rusk, who'd been the Secretary of State, and asked him to come visit with me and talk to him about how to do this. And off I went to Japan, which was not something I'd really planned to do when I was walking across Tennessee trying to be the governor. I met with the Nissan officials in Tokyo in the fall of 1979. At that time, the Japanese companies, which seemed so powerful that there were books coming out saying Japan #1, we thought they might take over the United States economy, but they weren't making here what they sold here. They were making Nissan cars and trucks in Japan. But they were making a decision about where to locate in our country. I took with me a photograph of the United States at night, taken from a satellite. And they asked, where's Tennessee? I said, it's right in the middle of the lights. That reduced the shipping and transportation costs. And then the next decision was, where in the center did they want to go? Every state north of us did not have a right-to-work law. Tennessee and the states around us did. Nissan chose Tennessee. And they, and the General Motors plant that later came, and the Volkswagen plant, and thousands of suppliers have helped our middle class raise their incomes over the last 30 years. A third of our jobs are auto manufacturing jobs because we provided an environment in which automakers could compete in the world marketplace. And Nissan says today that soon they'll be making in the United States 85% of what they sell in the United States, which makes them a very American company. That's what we want. But this decision, Madam President, says would throw a big wet blanket over all the auto suppliers and manufacturers who might be thinking about moving into Tennessee or opening new plants in Tennessee, or suppliers who might be wishing to follow Boeing to South Carolina, because it says you can't make that decision. We've never had that kind of law in the United States. We've had a right-to-work law in the books since 1947. States have a right to adopt it or not to adopt it. And the legislation I'm offering today on behalf of 34 senators doesn't change that. But it does preserve the right of states to adopt a right-to-work law, the right of employees to join or not to join a union, and the right of employers to make decisions about where to locate their plants, or their ability to speak in public about what they're doing. This is a most consequential decision. It is one that deserves the attention of every senator, because as the Boeing chairman, who is the head of President Obama's Export Council, wrote in the Wall Street Journal this week, that a union state would not be able to attract a manufacturer because a manufacturer might be afraid that any expansion could never be done in a right-to-work state. And by simple mathematics, if Boeing, which is our largest exporter, 155,000 employees in the United States, 15,000 around the world, has a disincentive, or if it can't expand a new production line in a right-to-work state, and if it might think twice about expanding in any other state, then where's it going to go? It's going to go to some other country. So this decision by the acting general counsel of the National Labor Relations Board is the single most important action I have seen in years that would rush American jobs overseas in pursuit of an environment in which they can build and manufacture competitively. It is just the reverse of what President Carter said to the governors 30 years ago when he said, governors, go to Japan, persuade them to make here what they sell here. We did that. They came here. They're making 85% of what they sell here. We want Volkswagen to do that. We want General Motors to do that. We want Ford to do that. And we want Boeing to do that. And we say to them, but we're going to tell you, the federal government is going to tell you where you have to locate your plants. You're going to override Section 14B of the Taft-Hartley Act, which was passed in 1947, and which has created an environment which has really permitted American manufacturing to succeed. All one has to do is to read David Halberstam's book, The Reckoning, in the late 1980s, to see that if our entire auto industry were still locked into Detroit, that it wouldn't be as competitive as it is today. Cars made in America. I know that firsthand because I saw it happen when Nissan came to Tennessee. They didn't hire a bunch of people from Japan to run the plant. They went to Detroit. They got Ford executives who knew how to run a plant, but weren't allowed to by the environment there, and they put them at a start from scratch place, and they created the most efficient automobile plant in North America. And we welcome also the General Motors plant and the United Auto Workers to their Spring Hill location in Tennessee. That's what a right-to-work state is. It's where you can choose to join the union or not to join the union. Both can operate. Employees make the decision. But when the federal government starts telling any company, a Boeing or a Boeing supplier or an auto company or an auto supplier, any manufacturing company, you can't locate in a right-to-work state, they probably won't locate in a non-right-to-work state. Where are they likely to go? Mexico, Europe, Japan. Boeing sells airplanes all around the world. It can make airplanes all around the world. And if we persist in policies like this, instead of having a situation where our largest exporter has 170,000 employees, more than 150,000 of which are in the United States, we'll turn that right upside down. And they'll be making 85% of their airplanes in the companies where they sell them, and the United States will have a lot fewer jobs. So this is an inconsequential matter that I hope attracts Democratic as well as Republican support. It preserves the right-to-work law. It preserves the choices of employees. It preserves the decision of corporations to make their own decisions about where to locate. And it would stop a federal government regulation, which is the single most effective action I know about to chase American jobs overseas and lower family incomes. I thank the chair and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Washington.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I have 11 unanimous consent requests for